"You're coming with me," said the preacher after her cruel father lifted her skirt, the words cutting through the thick, dusty air of the town square with the finality of a judge's gavel. The man, Jonah, was not a town preacher in a black coat and starched collar. He was a solitary figure who kept to the mountains, a man whose faith was etched not in sermons, but in the quiet set of his jaw and the unwavering steadiness of his gaze. He had come to town for salt and flour, and had instead found a scene of casual, public cruelty. The girl, Anna, stood frozen before her father, a hulking brute named Bartholomew, her face a pale, blank canvas of terror. Bartholomew, drunk and emboldened by the leering encouragement of his cronies, had grabbed a handful of her worn calico dress, his laughter a wet, ugly sound. But Jonah's voice, low and calm, stopped him cold. It was a voice that carried no threat of violence, but an absolute promise of consequence. Bartholomew turned, his eyes narrowing at the stranger. "This ain't your concern, preacher," he slurred, his hand still tangled in his daughter's dress. Jonah didn't move, his stance relaxed but rooted to the earth. He simply looked past the father to the daughter, and in his eyes, Anna saw not pity, but an offer of sanctuary. "Let her go," Jonah said, the words as simple and hard as river stones. For a long, tense moment, the town held its breath. Then, with a curse, Bartholomew shoved Anna forward. She stumbled, nearly falling into the dust, but Jonah's hand was there, catching her arm gently. He didn't look back at the father. He simply turned and led her away, her small, trembling hand in his, walking out of the town and toward the silent, waiting mountains. Jonah's cabin was more of a fortress against loneliness than a home. It was nestled in a high meadow, built of sturdy, hand-hewn logs, with a single stone chimney that breathed a thin ribbon of smoke into the vast, indifferent blue of the sky. Inside, it was spare, clean, and silent. A narrow cot, a rough-sawn table, a single chair, and a shelf of well-worn books were the only concessions to comfort. For Anna, who had known only the cramped, chaotic squalor of her father's house, the stark simplicity of the cabin was like a cleansing breath. She stood in the center of the room, a ghost of a girl wrapped in a shroud of fear, her shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow that never came. Jonah moved around her with a quiet, deliberate economy of motion. He stoked the fire in the hearth, his movement slow and predictable. He ladled water from a bucket into a basin and set it on the table alongside a clean cloth and a small sliver of soap. He placed a tin plate with a piece of cornbread and salted pork beside it. He did all of this without speaking a single word to her, without even looking at her directly, granting her the dignity of being unobserved. He then took a blanket from his own cot and laid it on a pile of fresh straw in the driest corner of the cabin, creating a small, safe nest for her. He ate his own meal standing by the fire, his back to her. When he was done, he picked up an axe and went outside, the rhythmic thud of splitting wood becoming a steady, reassuring heartbeat in the quiet afternoon. Anna remained frozen, watching the light change on the cabin floor, her mind a storm of confusion and terror, but for the first time in years, the air she breathed did not taste of fear. The days that followed fell into a pattern of profound and unbroken silence. Jonah rose before the sun, his movements quiet as he started the fire and put a pot of coffee on to boil. He would leave a portion of whatever he made for breakfast on the table for Anna before heading out to work his small patch of land or hunt in the surrounding woods. Anna, in turn, moved like a shadow. She would only emerge from her corner when he was gone, eating the food he left with a furtive haste, her eyes constantly darting toward the door. She was a wounded creature, slowly learning the geography of a safe place. She learned the sound of his footsteps, the way he cleared his throat in the morning, the specific creak of the floorboard that announced his return at dusk. She watched him through the single glass-pane window as he worked, his movements methodical and strong. He never rushed, he never cursed, he never raised his voice. His steadiness was a balm to her shattered nerves. One afternoon, a sudden downpour sent him running back to the cabin. He entered, shaking the rain from his hat, and found her sitting at the table, her hands clenched in her lap, her body rigid with fear at his unexpected presence. He stopped, seeing her panic. Without a word, he turned, walked back out into the cold, driving rain, and sat on the covered porch, waiting out the storm so she could have the safety of the cabin to herself. Through the window, Anna watched him, watched the water drip from the brim of his hat, and a single, hot tear, the first she had shed in years, traced a path through the dust on her cheek. It was a tear not of sorrow, but of a strange, painful, and unfamiliar gratitude. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the rigid lines of fear around Anna began to soften. The change was not in words, for she still had not spoken, but in the language of the body. Her shoulders lost some of their permanent hunch. She stopped flinching at the sound of the cabin door opening. One morning, Jonah awoke to find the tin plates from the night before washed and stacked neatly on the table. He said nothing, but a flicker of something warm and hopeful stirred in his chest. A few days later, he returned from checking his snares to find the rough floor of the cabin had been swept clean with a makeshift broom of bound twigs. These small acts were her first attempts at communication, a quiet way of saying that she was more than just a victim he had rescued. She was a person seeking to reclaim her place in the world, one small, useful task at a time. Jonah understood. He began to leave things for her to find, small invitations to participate in the life of the cabin. A basket of mending with a needle and thread. A bowl of beans that needed snapping. He never gestured to them or mentioned them, simply left them where she would see them. He was creating a space for her agency to return, allowing her to choose to contribute. One evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, carefully stitching a patch onto one of his work shirts. The setting sun cast her in a soft, golden light, and as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, he saw not the terrified girl from the town square, but a woman of quiet strength and profound resilience. He felt a fierce, protective surge in his heart, an emotion so potent it startled him with its intensity. One afternoon, Jonah returned from the woods carrying not game, but a length of smooth, pale birchwood. He spent the next several evenings by the fire, his hands, which were so accustomed to the brute force of an axe, moving with surprising dexterity and gentleness. He worked with a small, sharp knife, the blade peeling away delicate curls of wood, slowly revealing the shape held within. Anna watched him from her corner, her curiosity a small, flickering candle in the darkness of her silence. She could not guess what he was making, but she was mesmerized by the process, by the patient, focused care he poured into the task. Finally, after a week of work, he was finished. He sanded the object with a rough piece of leather until it was as smooth as a polished stone. That night, he left it on the table for her. It was a comb, intricately carved, the handle shaped like a soaring hawk, its wings outstretched. It was a thing of simple, breathtaking beauty, an object of artistry and care in a world that had shown her none. When she picked it up, the wood was still warm from his hands. It was not a gift of necessity, like food or shelter, it was a gift of dignity. It was a recognition of her as a woman, not just a survivor. She ran her thumb over the hawk's smooth wings, her throat tight with an emotion too powerful for her silent world. That night, she used the comb, drawing it through her long, tangled hair, each stroke a reclamation of herself. The next morning, as Jonah prepared to leave, she stood in the doorway and spoke her first word to him, her voice a rusty, fragile whisper. "Jonah," he stopped, turning to face her. Her eyes, clear and direct for the first time, met his. "Thank you." The fragile peace of their shared solitude was shattered by the arrival of a stranger. He was a trapper heading down from the high country, and he stopped at Jonah's cabin seeking a bit of coffee and news. Jonah, wary but bound by the unwritten laws of mountain hospitality, shared his fire. The man's eyes lingered on Anna, who had retreated to the far corner of the cabin like a spooked doe. "That Bartholomew's girl, ain't she?" the trapper asked, his voice too loud in the quiet space. "Whole town's in an uproar. He's telling everyone a mad preacher stole his property." Jonah's face remained impassive, but a cold anger settled in his gut. He looked at Anna and saw the blood drain from her face, the old terror returning to her eyes, erasing months of hard-won peace. "She's not property," Jonah said, his voice level but laced with steel. The trapper, sensing the dangerous current in the air, quickly finished his coffee and departed, leaving a trail of unease behind him. The world they had built, a world that consisted only of a cabin and the surrounding meadow, had been breached. The threat was no longer a memory but a tangible thing, gathering itself in the valley below. That night, an unspoken tension filled the cabin. Anna barely ate, her hands trembling. Jonah sat by the fire long after she had retreated to her corner, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate movements. The polished gleam of the barrel reflected the firelight, a grim promise. He was a man of peace, a man of God, but he understood that some evils could not be turned away with prayer alone. He was watching the path that led down the mountain, his gaze fixed, waiting for the darkness he knew would come 2 days later. They came. The sky had turned a bruised, sullen grey, the air thick with the promise of a storm that mirrored the ugliness approaching Jonah's sanctuary. Bartholomew was not alone. He had brought his loutish son, Cletus, and 2 other men from the town, their faces mean and thirsty for violence. They rode into the clearing and stopped, their horses stamping impatiently. Bartholomew swung himself down from his saddle, his face mottled with rage and whiskey. "Preacher," he bellowed, his voice a desecration of the mountain quiet. "You've had your fun. I've come for what's mine." Jonah emerged from the cabin and stood on the porch, his rifle held loosely in one hand, pointed at the ground. He was calm, a lone bastion of stillness against their chaotic fury. "She's not yours," he stated, the word simple, absolute. From inside the cabin, Anna watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to disappear into the shadows as she had done her entire life. Cletus, emboldened by his father, started to walk toward the porch, a nasty smirk on his face. "PA's right. She belongs to us." Jonah took one step forward, blocking the steps. "Go back to town," he warned, his voice dangerously low. "There's nothing for you here." Bartholomew laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "We ain't leaving without the girl." He nodded to his men, who began to dismount, spreading out to flank the cabin. The confrontation was inevitable, the air electric and heavy, the first drops of cold rain beginning to fall like tears on the thirsty ground. The violence, when it came, was sudden and clumsy. Cletus, never one for patience, lunged for the porch steps. Jonah moved with a speed that belied his calm demeanor, not with the rifle, but with the solid weight of his own body. He met Cletus on the steps, and the 2 men crashed to the muddy ground. Bartholomew's other men rushed forward, but they were not prepared for the ferocity of a man defending his home. Jonah fought not with rage, but with a cold, efficient purpose, his fists landing with the solid impact of a hammer on an anvil. He was a wall, an immovable object of conviction. Inside, Anna was frozen, her mind screaming. The sounds of the fight, the grunts and curses, were the sounds of her old life, the sounds she had fled. She saw her father, Bartholomew, bypass the fight, his eyes fixed on the cabin door, on her. He was coming for her. A lifetime of terror threatened to swallow her whole. But then, something else rose up from the depths of her soul. It was the memory of a carved comb, the feel of new boots on her feet, the image of a man sitting in the rain for her comfort. It was a new strength, forged in quiet acts of kindness. As Bartholomew's hand reached for the cabin door, it was flung open from the inside. Anna stood there, no longer a cowering victim, but a woman filled with a righteous fire. In her hands, she held the heavy iron poker from the hearth. Her voice, when she spoke, did not tremble. It rang out across the clearing, clear and strong, a bell of defiance. "Get away from this house," she commanded. Bartholomew stopped, his jaw slack with shock. He had never seen this version of his daughter, this woman with fire in her eyes and iron in her hand. For a moment, his blustering rage faltered, confronted by a will he did not recognize. But the surprise quickly curdled back into fury. "You disobedient whelp," he snarled, taking a step toward her. At that precise moment, another sound cut through the rain and the sounds of the brawl, the thunder of approaching hooves. A lone rider crested the hill, reining his horse to a dramatic stop. It was the sheriff, his coat soaked, his face grim. The trapper, it seemed, had a conscience after all. "That's enough, Bartholomew," the sheriff yelled, his voice carrying the full weight of the law. The fighting stopped. Cletus groaned from the mud, and the other men backed away from Jonah, their appetite for the fight gone. The sheriff dismounted, his eyes taking in the scene, Jonah, bruised but standing tall, Bartholomew, poised to attack his own daughter, and Anna, standing her ground on the porch, fierce and unafraid. "What is the meaning of this?" the sheriff demanded, though he already knew. Bartholomew began to spew his story about his stolen property. The sheriff cut him off with a raised hand. He walked to the porch and looked at Anna, his expression softening. He said respectfully. You want to tell me what happened? Are you here of your own free will? Anna looked from the sheriff to Jonah, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. She took a deep breath, the cold, clean, rainy air filling her lungs. I am, she said, her voice steady. This is my home, her words, simple and true, sealed Bartholomew's fate. The sheriff turned, his face hard as granite. Bartholomew, he said. You and your boys are under arrest in the aftermath. A profound quiet settled over the mountain, deeper and more peaceful than before. The storm had passed, washing the air clean and leaving the world glistening and new. The sheriff and his prisoners were gone, their angry voices a fading echo down the valley. Jonah stood on the porch, watching them go, the tension slowly leaving his body. Anna came out of the cabin carrying the basin of water and a clean cloth. She walked to him, her movements no longer timid, but filled with a quiet, confident purpose. He had a shallow cut on his cheekbone, and she gently reached up, dabbing at the blood with the wet cloth. He stood perfectly still, allowing her to care for him, a reversal of the roles they had played for months. Her touch was feather-light, yet it grounded him more than anything he had ever known. The silence between them was no longer a void of trauma and uncertainty, but a shared space filled with unspoken understanding. All the fear, all the pain, all the loneliness of their past lives had been faced and conquered, together. He looked down at her, at the strength in her clear eyes, at the gentle curve of her mouth, and he knew he was no longer just her protector, he was a man in love. She finished cleaning the cut, her hand lingering on his cheek for a moment. He covered her hand with his own, his calloused thumb stroking her skin. Anna, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't have the words for what he felt, for the gratitude and all that filled his heart. He didn't need them. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit up her entire face, and he knew they had found their way home. In that quiet moment, with the world washed clean, they chose their future, a future of shared sunrises and quiet strength, built not on words, but on the unshakable foundation of a love that had been born in a moment of rescue and forged in the fires of healing. What do you think is the most powerful act of kindness? Is it a grand gesture, or the small, consistent things we do for each other every day? I want to hear from you in the comments. And if you were moved by Jonah and Anna's journey, there's another story of love and redemption waiting for you right here.